I want to get into the Hulk Hogan thing this way because in my lifetime, I was born in 1980. So when I'm a little kid, Hulk Hogan, even if you thought it was hokey and wrestling's fake, Hulk Hogan was a beloved cultural icon. But I want to get into Hulk Hogan this way. He went from cultural icon in the cable TV era, and of course Rocky III. He goes into the reality TV era of the aughts and early 2000s, and that is insight into a person who already has icon status. Then it covers viral video, cancel culture, all that stuff because of the sex tape with it, Bubba the Love Sponge's wife, and he goes on the racist tirade and all that. Then you have all the tabloid stuff after that and the problems with his son, Nick. And then you have the Gawker stuff, which is media, which is Peter Thiel comes in and backs him in that lawsuit. And of course, Peter Thiel goes on to do political things with J.D. Vance and others. And then you have the return where he becomes a pitchman. And then you have him showing up at the RNC. And you go from the 80s where he's the most universally beloved cultural icon in wrestling to the last time we saw him a few weeks ago at Saturday Night Main Event. He's booed out of the building. I think this is a story not just of Terry Bollea, the man, Hulk Hogan, the character. I think this is a fascinating insight to how media has changed how we look at icons like that.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I even said on Twitter that you could almost make if anyone ever tries to do a biopic on Hogan, they really need to come at it from sort of this epic, tragic tale of how perception can change over time of someone, because you take this guy who basically beat up his body to the point that it may or may not, we obviously have to wait until for time and more information to come out, but may have not contributed to his passing, who beat up his body to get the adulation of crowds. And he was so beloved. He was a fabric of Americana. He was in movies, he was in games, he was in shows. He became bigger than wrestling. He took wrestling from being this niche thing with territory that was divided by territories into becoming this worldwide phenomenon where it's got its big fans. There are people who have never bothered with wrestling at all, and they know who Hulk Hogan is. He became so massive. And then in the 90s, he changes the game by doing his heel run, or for folks who aren't aware of what that term means, basically doing the bad guy thing at WCW, and completely changes the way that these characters are presented to us. In a way that I think helped, because WWE definitely took a lot of lessons from what was going on with the NW and WCW to do the Attitude Era that really revitalized them, and really changed it from being this looking like this sort of hokey thing that was just for kids to something that everybody could get into with certain grounded characters, more shades of gray, I should say. And then in the 2000s, as a legend, he does the whole Hogan Knows Best on VH1. Back when VH1 was big, I have no idea what on earth VH1 is doing these days. But back then, I remember during the 2000s, which those were my teenage years, and I remember like VH1 was massive with the reality show stuff. Hogan had a massive show on there. But then it sort of really is in the 2010s when sort of this facade started to break, and and it's almost like the crowds that love this man started to see not Hulk Hogan but Terry Bollea, the man, and the disturbing racist tapes that I got out there, the whole situation with his son and his friend getting to that vegetative state, and then inevitably the cherry on top, Hogan decided to get involved in politics at one of the most politically divisive times that we've ever seen. And to the point that when we get to the final time that we see this man on TV, he's getting booed out the building. It's really kind of like this interesting, tragic fall of this hero. And now with his sudden passing, it's sort of this very complicated situation because there are people who want to celebrate how important this man was to the wrestling industry, and yet there's all these ugly things that we found out about him that have complicated things. And I think that's why you've seemingly see this very big split among how to address all this between the younger and older generations. Gen Z's, what they knew about Hogan mostly was all this controversial stuff that he was getting caught up in. They weren't around for when he was such a big cultural icon and hero. And in the wrestling industry, because for the longest time, as beloved as Hogan was, it was well known in the wrestling industry that he wasn't necessarily one of the more respected guys. He was known for keeping guys down. He was involved in union busting. There were a lot of things that led to him not being very well respected in the industry, even though he gave as much as he did to it. I agree with you 100%. I think if anybody ever tries to tackle a biopic of this man, you have to come at it from this sort of like this almost like a Greek tragedy of sorts. How he went from being this hero and icon to getting booed out the building just months before his passing.
Yeah, the last episode I recorded, and I hate to compare people, but because it's so close, I don't have a choice. Ozzy Osbourne died a couple days apart from Hulk Hogan. And the thing about Hogan, and I've watched, look, I wasn't allowed to watch wrestling, so the Monday Night Wars, I was usually back in my mom's bedroom, my hand on the TV, so I could switch it off real quick if I heard her coming down the hallway, right? Sorry, Mom, it's just true. That statute of limitations. But I was a wrestling fan, and I watched all that stuff when Hogan was doing the WCW stuff. I'm a little too young. I knew the cultural part of Hogan more than the in-ring stuff from the 80s because I was 6, 7, 8 years old. So I knew what the big yellow fingers meant, but I didn't really watch the product, if that makes sense. But Ozzy died. A lot of people thought Ozzy was a gimmick. And it was, the Prince of Darkness. Yeah, that was a gimmick. And gimmick, let's slow down. The parlance for wrestling people, the gimmick is the presentation. Hulk Hogan was the gimmick for Terry Bollea, right? You can go back before him when he was, the Boulder Brothers and all that other stuff. But Terry Bollea, the man, Hulk Hogan's the gimmick. A lot of people thought Ozzy was a gimmick, and it kind of was. But Ozzy was just always being Ozzy, even though he had the gimmick and the Prince of Darkness and all that was a little tongue-in-cheek. And Ozzy died absolutely beloved. Universally beloved, except for a couple idiots on the internet. Hogan's almost the opposite, because Terry Bollea, there's the old adage in wrestling, man, you become your gimmick. And we've seen it happen with Ric Flair. Terry Bollea may be the most glaring example of it. You just could not separate Hulk Hogan from Terry Bollea at the end. And I'm sure with his family and his wife and his kids and all that, and we know the train wreck his ex-wife is online and all that, I think he just really became the gimmick for business reasons, and I don't begrudge him that because he made a lot of money. There's the stuff in the last few years with the politics and all that. He was very calculated. That's what made him Hulk Hogan. He picked the right moments to do things. He picked the right moments to go to Vince McMahon and backstab the AWA and all that story. He picked the right moment to turn heel with WCW. He was good at picking moments until he wasn't good at picking moments. And the gimmick overate it. And in the modern era where people have all the information and they can see the viral video, I think it's important what you said about the generation gap. I know my kids and their friends and younger, that 26, 27 and younger demographic, they got zero tolerance for racist behavior. They got zero tolerance for bigotry. If they see it on a viral clip, they're done. Especially if you never get a straight out apology, with Hogan never really gave for any of that. And there was other instances. I think those two parallels where there was a gimmick, but it was just the guy and the gimmick lined up to it. And then you had Terry Bollea chasing the gimmick and chasing the gimmick and chasing the gimmick. And the modern Greek tragedy is he became the gimmick and people utterly rejected it. Not just the general public. The wrestling fans, when he showed up and got booed out of Saturday Night Main Event, which was his show, that show was designed for Hulk Hogan to be on network TV, the original run of it. man, that was one of those moments where you go, time catches up with people, the truth catches up with people. I'm not dancing on the grave. This is just how stuff works out. People that had access to the information that were the biggest hardcore wrestling fans rejected the guy, the gimmick, the whole thing. For somebody my age, it was really an amazing moment and a real, let's keep using the term, it really is a Greek tragedy because it was man and hubris and just that classic story.
Oh yeah, and people have to understand because I know there were some accusations that he got booed out just because it was Los Angeles and Los Angeles is a very blue city, which is true. I mean, Los Angeles shifted right considerably in 2024 and was still a landslide win for Harris. But in the very same show, The Undertaker, who had Donald Trump on his podcast, got a hero's reception. So it goes further than any politics of the city that he was in. The industry, I mean, it got to the point where there are wrestlers who would tongue-in-cheek take shots at fans, and the fans would sort of like refer to them as Hogan, as a derogatory term. That just tells you how much his status had fallen as a cultural icon. And if you think about it, this kind of just struck me as we've been having this conversation. After the whole controversy that happened with his son and the whole car crash situation, he started to kind of be being beloved again. He appeared at WrestleMania 30, had a pretty good reception and all that stuff. And then before everything just started to become this avalanche, and that whole thing of chasing fame and being obsessed with being in the spotlight, if he had just stayed low and not constantly be trying to be in the spotlight during his final years, he probably could have saved himself a lot more goodwill. But these guys, especially in the wrestling industry, where they don't know when to quit, they don't know how to retire. Even if they're not wrestling anymore, they want to show up at the show and get the big crowd to cheer for them. There's a I'm not even sure if it's available anymore on the WWE's library for people to see publicly, but there was this reality show called Legends House back in the early to mid 2010s, and there's an episode where Nick Nolte comes in as a guest, and Roddy Piper, who is no longer with us, has a conversation with him of, you actors, people don't think of you as the character that you're playing. We basically are seen as the characters that we're playing. And you see this in anybody who tries to critique wrestling, the wrestling product. Because if they try to say, well, this character isn't working for me, I'm not really a big fan of seeing this character succeed. If a wrestler sees that, they'll take that as a personal shot instead of somebody who's trying to break down a narrative work, and whether it works for them or not. And so it's a whole different ball game than if it's not just someone simply being a character. It gets to a point where someone is seen as the character.
And it's more than the characters, because now the Gawker things, and it's interesting because the political narrative for the folks that are, Trump supporting and whatever, and that's fine. The media ecosystem around Trump has really harped in on the Gawker stuff. Gawker, how do I say this, Jim? Terry Bollea, the guy, Hulk Hogan, did a horrible, terrible thing. And the racist comments that he never fully did the full apology for. And by the way, folks, you can get mad if you want to. He did a locker room apology, quote unquote, in air quotes, if you're listening on the podcast, where he went to the WWE locker room. He had to do the apology before they'd let him back on the show, basically. And he non-apologized. He just said, don't get caught on video. I'm paraphrasing. that really hurt him in the locker room. You never got the full apology. The thing with the Gawker thing, though, was it was really two bad people suing each other, and the one bad person had a better principle and legal position and won. Gawker getting their comeuppance was a good thing in my humble but accurate opinion. Hulk Hogan was an imperfect tool to do that, but I think it was the right judgment and the right call. And the way, look, I don't want anybody to lose their jobs, but the way Gawker and the people at Gawker in that era conducted themselves, especially online to people, was pretty abhorrent. I think that's fair to say. And the Peter Thiel angle to it, people are going and grabbing that and putting it with him coming out with all the Trump stuff and the RNC speech and all that. But that's one slice of this. You have to take the full context of, like, yes, he took down Gawker. Why was he in that position to start with? He's on videos sleeping with his buddy's wife, consensual. It wasn't unfair. They were all swingers or whatever. None of my business. I don't care. And he's saying all this racist stuff on a sex tape that should have never got out. That's just such a microcosm of what a hot mess our media coverage is. No, it shouldn't have gotten out, but people have a right to judge that. And people did judge it. And especially when you don't get an apology for it, and then you later on get the telephone calls with him talking to Nick and he says more racist stuff. People judge that now. And just winning a court case or just showing up at an RNC, there's a segment of the media now that wants to wash all the rest of it away because it fits their current narrative. That's why I started out saying, like, you have the cable TV era, you have the reality TV era, then you have the viral video era, and Hogan encompasses all that, and it affected him in different ways. And I think it's a fascinating Rosetta Stone into our culture and how we're doing media nowadays.
Oh yeah, I mean, a lot of the Hogan controversies began before he even like decided to start getting involved in politics towards the end there. Like that's why when he showed up at the RNC, for some people was almost like just a doubling down of a stereotype for him to do. But it also is like he tried to get involved in all these other things. Like at the end of his life, he was trying to hawk this great American beer, which was supposed to be a response to all the Bud Light culture war stuff, the Bud Light culture war stuff that like nobody talks about anymore, and yet he's out running around hawking this beer. He really kind of just like he really started towards the end of his life kind of just constantly digging himself in these holes, which all culminated in the infamous, what will be tragically the last moment of his on TV, getting booed out the building. A building that, as you could argue, is as filled as it is because of his contributions to wrestling, and yet here he is getting booed out the building by these people, no longer beloved. And yeah, I mean, it's just amazing to see what happened to him.
Yeah, and the booing out of the building, the beer was a part of it because the smart fans knew WWE had bought in as a part of that, and they had a marketing deal with it. I think they had an ownership piece of it. That was one of those reactionary. That was part of it too. More like the politics is part of it, yes. But the WWE audience, as opposed to other wrestling audiences, like probably like AEW, which is, I would say, more progressive. I think that's a fair way to put it.
Yeah.
They're a more traditional audience in a lot of ways in the WWE. They know about that. They knew, oh, he's here to hawk this beer. And poor Jimmy Hart's out there waving an American flag, getting booed out of the building. And Jimmy Hart's the nicest guy ever. Poor guy. But they know that. The audience knows that. And people don't keep up on wrestling. The biggest change in wrestling in the internet era is the smart mark fans. The ones that they know is going on, but they also pick and choose their information so that they create their own little world inside of wrestling. For an entire arena to boo Hulk Hogan out of the building, it wasn't just the politics. It wasn't just the fact that he's embellished every story ever up, from everything from, working 500 days out of the year to to auditioning for Metallica, just all kinds of crazy lies he's told over the years. They know all of that piece. There's the family piece. There's the racism piece. And then it's like, we know the only reason you're here is to sell beer. And they're just like, no, the modern fan is not into. Ric Flair's had this problem when he shows up. They know when they're just being hawked a product now, and they don't like it. And then you put everything else on top of it. The smart fans get a lot of heat and hatred but they weren't wrong with Hogan.
No, they weren't. And I think it got to the point where even like some casual fans started to catch on. I mean, and you're right. It is the various audiences. UFC, I would say it's a right wing crowd. AEW is definitely more progressive. WWE is more in between. And like I said, in the very same show, The Undertaker, who had Donald Trump on his podcast, who's very open about his politics, got a hero's welcome. It's because The Undertaker has gone on to be very well respected. He's still trying to give to the business. Hogan was not seen that way. He lost that respect that he used to have as a veteran. And regardless, all these things that we are saying, regardless, it doesn't take away from the fact that a lot of the things he did helped to create the business, put the business where it is, I should say. And what a big part of culture and the fabric of Americana that he was. But he did, unfortunately, put himself in this position where when the man passes, it's this big, complicated conversation to have compared to Ozzy Osbourne, where it was almost nothing but love for him when he passed.
Yeah, and I think that goes to the realness part. Hulk Hogan, the character, and Terry Bollea, the man. We want to love our media figures. Naturally, we want to. Now, it's a little different in the, to quote the old Offspring song, it's cool to hate, right? There's this segment of online, and sometimes I'm guilty of it because I'm overly cynical. Sometimes you're a much more happy-go-lucky guy than me. I'm very cynical. You're very happy-go-lucky guy. You go to a movie cynical, you go to the movie and like, I want to like this movie, and I'm more like, I'm not going to go watch that movie, period. And then you're like, no, give it a chance. You're more happy-go-lucky than me. But there's this segment of the modern media and modern online and modern social media where they just want to hate everything. That's a fair critique. There is people that just want to hate Hulk Hogan because it's the cool thing to do. I think there's a little bit of that in the LA appearance where it's like, oh, once it started going, I think it became a thing where like everybody jumped on it. That's fair to say. That's true too. But at the same time, there's been this cover for the people who are bad faith actors, and we've seen it with the Hogan stuff in the last few days, especially on the political side of, well, if you say anything negative about this person for any reason, you're just a hater. And I understand cancel culture is a thing, although I hate that term. No, Hogan's a very complex person. And if you're going to talk about his place in history and entertainment, not just wrestling, he was in Rocky III when people don't understand the cultural significance of that movie when he showed up to it. That, along with the national expansion and the timing, is what really kicked off the WWF at the time, WWE as we modern know it, was that movie and him getting that mainstream attention and going on the talk shows and choking out Richard Belzer, rest in peace. I love him so much. All that stuff happened because of Rocky III. He was the crossover guy. But he was also the character Hulk Hogan made by Vince McMahon with perfect timing and everything that went on. And then, and I hate to keep coming back to it, but I just find it so fascinating. It's the people that rejected him. It's the fans that rejected him. And they rejected him not because of a storyline and not because of Gawker and not because of the sex tape and not because of the racist comments, because there's been wrestlers that have made racist comments before and it'll happen again. And it'll keep happening. They rejected Terry Bollea, the man, because the more they found out about him through the reality show, through the viral video era, through the remake, they were okay with him showing up as a legend. They just didn't want to see him all the time. The more they found out about the man, the less they liked the man. And I don't think it's hating, and I don't think it's unfair to say we can take the totality of this man's life and go, he had greatness. He had a great ability. He had talent. He had an amazing business sense. I don't think anybody can argue that as far as timing and getting his and whatever. And he made really bad personal choices that ruined almost all of it in the public's eye. The totality of a person is really hard for us to do in our modern era. And yet, if we're going to be good human beings using this technology of social media and instant media and tailored media, We have to be able to take something like Hulk Hogan and go, we're going to look at the totality of this man. We're not just going to hot click it. We're not just going to try to get a viral moment out of a response to it and go, like a lot of historical figures, which he now is after he's passed away, there's ups, there's downs, and the whole story matters for us to learn what to learn from it going forward and have proper context.
Yeah, I mean, and it's if you look at the two differences, like talking about Ozzy, the big story with Ozzy was kind of like, wow, he passed away just 2 weeks after his final ever concert, which they knew it was going to be his final ever concert. With Hogan, we literally just a couple months ago we're having this whole online discussion about, hey, did you see how this guy got rejected by the very people that used to love him? So it is a big part of the story, and it's like, well, how did that happen? How did this happen to this man? How did he get there?
Yeah, and the answer to that question is the people that paid the most attention to it were the ones that knew the most about it, and they're the ones that rejected him. And then the media, you know, the right-wing media that just knew him because of the Trump stuff and the Real American Beer and all that, those people, the casual fans and all them, they're surprised when the people who know the most did the most rejecting. And that's why I bring it up. I think this is where you study it. You know, look, we all got to stand before our God and answer for our sins. I'm not judging the man particularly, although I can fruit inspect his life and the racism and the things like that, you know, we don't condone. But the character and the media persona of it, the people that knew it the best rejected it the worst. And the people that are saying you're not allowed to do that are the people that airdropped in just for the viral moment of it or because it suits their purposes. And that's not just a Hulk Hogan story. That's a political story. That's every time we have a major trending thing. That's every time we have a natural disaster. That's every time we have a school shooting now. That's every time we have a political scandal or a celebrity scandal. We just did this with the Coldplay stuff. We did this with the guy that murdered the healthcare exec. Every story now is following this same model. The people that pay the most attention to it will have the strongest reactions. And then the people that are just showing up to grab a media hit or clicks are, you know, waving their finger at them, almost contrarian no matter what. This is how every story's getting covered now, I feel like.
Yes, because that's the way social media is now. I mean, this is how it is these days. This isn't like in the old days. Like I'm you know, in a weird way, because there's a lot of people now. The group of people among the Gen Zers and stuff are growing more and more who are not aware of the days where we had to wait as information came in. And then react to it. Like, I'm sort of blessed in that I am old enough that I saw what it used to be like. I saw what media and the way that we took in news used to be like. Now it's everything is automatic. You find yourself you can find yourself sucked in and reacting to it and going, well, I mean, I've done it. I've been guilty of it where something some news breaks. I have a reaction to it, and then it's like, maybe I should have. Okay, hold on. You know what? Let me wait a little bit to see more information. Like, it's just the way that it is these days, where when you have the world at your fingertips, seemingly with social media and the way that news comes in, it's so easy to just constantly be like reacting to it without taking in all the information or seeking out who would know the best of that information. And I mean, I don't have any answers whatsoever on how to make that better, but it just seems to be where we are right now.
One other thing with the Hulk Hogan thing, then I want to talk some movies with you. Culturally, I find it very interesting that people have tried to do that model with a lot of things. You just artificially is the wrong word, but you know what I'm saying. You take a character and you build it up and you make it a superstar. You know, Vince McMahon and the WWE, WWF at the time took what was already pretty popular in a lot of ways, Hulk Hogan, or was going to become Hulk Hogan, and made it the superstar. And the marketing and the branding it to the kids and Hulkamania, right? and the T-shirts and the big yellow foam fingers, which were just ubiquitous. Everybody had one of them stupid fingers back in the late 80s. And all of that. And then the people that spun off that, Mr. T, that sort of thing. The branding, the marketing, all that. People paid attention to that. That really became a model for a lot of other things. And you can see a thread through the Hulk Hogan thing. I'm going to go back to Rocky 3 because you're a movie guy. That cross-promotional thing in movies wasn't done a lot at that time. And people go, oh, not only are you going to get on, Johnny Carson or a late night show if you show up on this movie, if you're a sports figure, you get to hype your sport. If you're a music figure and you do a movie, you get to hype up your music. If you're a wrestler, you get to hype up wrestling. That cross-promotional thing now is to the point where the studios are making movies just so they can get the cross-promotional star in the movie. And you have TV shows built like this. One of the things that's changed in the Hulk Hogan era is he was kind of one of those first cross-purposes guy. He was more than a wrestler, but that business model now is way more ubiquitous to the point where that's almost standard operating procedure. When the UFC does something, it's who's in the first row of the crowd, Donald Trump or whoever. WWE, they're always having superstars in, but it's crossed over the other side now where movies and TV shows, they always want that big guest star. They always want that musical act. Can we get this person to do this role? This is something that you see all the time now that Hogan really was a pioneer in one way or another.
Yes. When he did the Thunder, was Thunder Lips in Rocky 3, that was really just before he was really going to blow up with WWE. He had already been picking a lot of people. Like Hulkamania wasn't born necessarily in WWE. He was in the AWA doing his thing, and at one point he was, even when he did WCW, that wasn't his first heel run. He did the heel thing for a bit. I had a feud with Andre the Giant in AWA, but he did, and then he tried to use that first it was like cameos, like he's in Gremlins 2 and stuff like that. But then he tried to do movies, Suburban Commando, Mr. Nanny. I think he's in one of the Three Ninjas movies.
Can we mention No Holds Barred is one of the worst movies ever made? Can we acknowledge that, folks? If you, it's got to be on YouTube somewhere. I didn't look. If you've never seen No Holds Barred and you know anything about wrestling and anything about movies, it is one of the worst movies ever made, and you just have to watch it to see how bad the train wreck is. Please go watch No Holds Barred. It's so terrible.
And apparently that was completely produced by McMahon and Hogan. That was a whole damn.
And it shows in retrospect.
That's not a very good movie. I haven't seen it in ages now, but yeah, it's not good. But he didn't necessarily have the same success that Dave Bautista, John Cena, or The Rock have had in transitioning to doing movies or shows and stuff like that. But he was arguably the first major wrestler that showed that you could do it. To go from being in this thing that people at the time thought was corny and hokey and fake and who cares about that, to the point now that you have 3 major wrestlers coming out with movies every year. To the point now that I'm keeping an eye out if this is going to be an award season that features Dwayne Johnson in it, because he's going to be part of a UFC biopic. So he really was the pioneer in that, especially for the wrestling industry.
I'll just wrap up the Hogan portion of this way. I think, because I'm a little older than you, I think I'm going to remember the Hulk Hogan stuff for he was an icon that fell because of hubris. It's almost, we talked Greek tragedy. It's very Icarian. He got up and he figured out how to fly, but he just couldn't get close enough to the sun for his own ego and wound up crashing and burning. I think I'm going to really take away the media part of this, of how the media era changed, and he didn't adapt to, let's call it what it was. He didn't adapt to the media era he was in, and plenty of dirty people do dirty deeds and figure out how to be okay on camera, and he never figured out how to do that. Yes, I know the Gawker tape was illegally, missed me with that. I think I'm going to remember Hogan as kind of that Icarian figure of he got the highs, but the highs were never good enough. And his hubris kind of brought him down, and he didn't adapt to the world. as it changed around him, and it really hurt him and hurt his legacy. And he brought it on himself. It's not the public's fault. He did what he did. But he also, you can't really write the modern entertainment story without him. And that's part of the legacy as well. How are you going to remember Hulk Hogan now that he's passed?
I think I'm going to remember him exactly like you just said. And again, I think if you're a younger person, the only thing that you think of with Hogan, especially if you're not particularly a wrestling fan who goes back to watch the old stuff, you're just going to remember all the controversies and all that stuff. But I can't not think about the fact how important this man was to the wrestling industry. I can't think about the big moments he was part of in the wrestling industry. Whether I had to watch them back because I wasn't around at the time, or if I watched them happen live. I'll never forget watching The Rock and Hogan and that big moment at WrestleMania 18. And he is a part of culture, especially culture in the 80s and 90s, and then reality TV in the 2000s. But you're right, he did have a Greek tragedy in that he went from beloved icon, loved from the crowds, to his final ever moment on wrestling TV, on the form of entertainment that he made his bread and butter with, was getting booed out the building, rejected by the fans that at one point loved him. And again, if anybody ever does a biopic on this man, I really think that is the story that you should be telling, is how did we get to that point for this man?
I got to ask you, who plays Hogan, though? I know a few years ago they almost got one off the ground and Hemsworth was supposed to play him.
Yeah.
That probably would have worked okay. Projecting out now, because it's going to take you 4 or 5 years to do it. I think somebody will greenlit something now with him dead, because the folks that don't understand, it's way easier to do biopics when somebody's dead than when they're alive for lots and lots of reasons. Studios prefer to do it that way. Plus, you get the whole story. Who do you pick? Because you watch a lot more movies than I do. They'll probably get somebody we've never heard of, but who would you get to play Terry Bollea?
I mean, I think Hemsworth would be a really interesting choice.
He's getting a little old, though.
He is, but I mean, he's still got a body that a lot of guys would wish to have. I don't know, like Hemsworth just stands out to me too much, but also like I'm trying to think, thinking here in my head, and I mean, he's the one that's what they'll probably end up doing is finding somebody that I'm not that isn't well known, and go with something like that. So that's my
The
thinking.
Rock's going to play him. That would be the perfect mashing of the two biggest egos in the history of the sport. Is the Rock does The Rock plays Hogan. They figure out some way to do it. I'm only half kidding. I don't like going to movies. I would pay money to go watch that in the theater just for what a train wreck it would be.
That would be a fascinating study. But there's almost a part of me that almost wonders if no, because if you do it, you can't just do an impression. You also have to hit that growl in his voice. So yeah, they're gonna have to find someone who's can't. They really got to hit the nail on the head doing Hogan.
You know, one that just popped into my head though, and he may not do it because he did Iron Claw and was so good on it, but Jeremy Allen White was so good in Iron Claw, he could probably pull it off.
He probably could, but again, like you can't just do a gimmick of what the kind of a Hogan promo. You better hit that growl in his voice.
Yeah, and I think because he did the Texas. One thing about Iron Claw that didn't get talked about, it's a great movie. If you don't know what it is, it's about the Von Erich. It is not an easy film to watch. Like, it's a beautifully made film, but it's hard to watch because it's so dark and
it's depressing.
Well, the real story is even worse than what the movie was, because
that's true. The movie did cut out even worse things, but apparently the writing and directing team said that it got to a point where they didn't want to make it like you don't know how many people came to me after that movie and were like, oh, did all that stuff really happen? And I'm like,
you could do a whole movie
even
just
worse
on Fritz. If they did a movie just on Fritz, it'd be a horror movie, literally. They probably should, by the way. They need to go back. Holt, what's the guy's name played Fritz in it? Holt McClarney or something like that.
Yeah.
I apologize. I don't remember his name. Fantastic portrayal. Fritz was such an evil, rotten detestable human being.
Yeah.
Like, so, but they got the culture. Texas of that period had a very distinct culture built into it, which is part of the Von Erich story. And I thought they really grabbed that. So when you're talking about, look, Terry Bollea is Tampa, Florida, and that's an area, there's a very distinctive boomer Florida man aspect to Terry Bollea and Hulk Hogan, especially as he got older. You're from there. I've got family in Clearwater, so I know exactly what this is. And people probably don't even know what to call it. But, he's had Hogan's Beach there. He's lived there. He lived in California briefly when he first blew up, but he's basically lived in Tampa all his life that we've known him as Hulk Hogan. That boomer Florida man aesthetic very much became a big chunk of late model Hulk Hogan. And that's part of something you're going to have to get a hold of. And you live there, so you explain it better than I can.
I mean, the best way that I could describe it, it's almost like it's almost like this smashing of old school biker meets just chilling at the beach attitude with super traditional views. That's probably the best way that I could describe it. Like there's just it's just this aesthetic of like almost your old grandpa who did the biker lifestyle and they hang out at the beach and they're cool in that aspect, that but they have certain traditional views that maybe that aren't necessarily that well in line with where some of the younger generation is. That's probably the best way that I could describe what that sort of boomer aesthetic is down here in Central Florida.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing. All right, Hulk Hogan is dead. His legacy will live on. The controversy will definitely live on.